The order came through at 4:37 shipboard time, and Kalen Voss read it twice before the words stopped rearranging themselves into a joke. Abort cargo. Initiate emergency decoupling. Return to rendezvous point Delta Null for retrieval. No exceptions. 42 alien children were stacked in cryopods behind his cockpit, each one small enough to fit inside a human coffin, each one frozen in a chemical sleep that made their faces look like tiny, peaceful masks. They had been breathing through machines for 11 standard days. They had been his responsibility for 11 standard days. And now the empire that had hired him, the Virexian Compact, a name that spanned 37 star systems and 14 billion souls, was telling him to vent them into the black. His hand hovered over the decoupling lever for exactly 3 seconds. That was how long it took for his blood to go from room temperature to boiling. Control, this is Transport Shepard 9. Say again your last. I think my comm array is glitching. The voice that answered was not the dispatcher he'd been talking to for the past 2 weeks. It was sharper, colder. A man who had never loaded a cargo bay in his life. Your comm array is functional, Pilot Voss. You are ordered to decouple the cargo module and proceed to denull. A military interdiction vessel will collect the module for disposal. You have 12 minutes to comply before we mark you as non-compliant and escalate accordingly. Disposal. Not retrieval. Not transfer. Disposal. Kalen's knuckles went white on the armrest. He was 41 years old. He had flown cargo through asteroid storms, pirate sieges, and one particularly memorable incident involving a collapsing star and a very creative use of emergency thrusters. He had never refused a direct order from a Compact-affiliated client. He had never even considered it. But those faces, 42 of them, their eyes closed, their tiny hands folded. They looked like his nephew before the meningitis took him. They looked like every child he had ever seen sleeping peacefully in a transport pod on a dozen different colony worlds. What do you mean, disposal? His voice came out quieter than he intended. That was dangerous. Quiet meant he was thinking. The cargo is no longer viable for its intended purpose. Protocol Delta 7 mandates termination of non-viable biological assets to prevent genetic contamination of compact breeding programs. You are not cleared for further details. Comply, pilot. Genetic contamination? Breeding programs. Suddenly, the contract he had signed 6 months ago, the one with the vague language about biological transport logistics and material sensitive to temperature fluctuation, snapped into focus like a fist closing around his throat. He hadn't asked enough questions. He had seen the pay, a number large enough to buy his sister's medical treatments and his own retirement on a warm beach somewhere far from the shipping lanes. He had signed without reading the fine print. And now, 42 children from some conquered world were cargo to be disposed of, because they didn't fit some genetic ideal. Control, what species are these children? A pause, long enough for him to hear his own heartbeat. That information is classified above your security clearance. I'm holding them in my cargo bay. I can see their faces. I can see their ears. 4 of them, arranged in a spiral pattern. I can see their skin, blue-gray like storm clouds. I can see they're not human. That's not classified. That's just my eyes. Another pause, shorter this time, impatient. Species designation is irrelevant to your orders. You are a transport contractor. You have no stake in this cargo beyond delivery. Delivery is now canceled. Decouple. Kalen stood up. In the cockpit of a Shepard-class freighter, standing up meant hitting your head on the environmental control manifold unless you remembered to duck. He didn't duck. The pain was useful. It focused him. No. The word came out flat. Final. He had not planned to say it. It simply arrived, fully formed, from somewhere deeper than his rational mind. Pilot Voss, repeat your last transmission. I said no. I'm not decoupling. I'm not abandoning these kids, and I'm sure as hell not handing them over for disposal. So you can take your Protocol Delta 7 and your military interdiction vessel and... Careful, pilot. The coldness in that voice had teeth now. Not anger. Something worse. Certainty. The absolute conviction of a man who had given orders like this 100 times before and never once seen them disobeyed. You are alone. Your ship is unarmed. Your fuel reserves will last another 43 hours at current consumption. The nearest friendly port is 37 days away at maximum sublight. There are no human colonies within 100 light-years of your position. You have no allies, no weapons, no leverage, and no escape. The only reason you are still breathing is that you are currently useful to us as a delivery mechanism for the decoupling order. That usefulness expires in 11 minutes and 30 seconds. Kalen sat back down. Not because he was surrendering, because he needed to think. He pulled up the system map. They were in the outer reaches of an unremarkable red dwarf system. No planets worth naming, just a scattering of asteroid belts and one frozen gas giant that had never been formally surveyed. The rendezvous point, D-Null, was a 3-hour burn away, where a compact cruiser was presumably waiting to take possession of the cargo module and do something unspeakable to its contents. But D-Null wasn't the only point on the map. The asteroid belts were dense enough to hide a small ship, at least for a while. And the frozen gas giant had a radiation shadow on its far side, a blind spot where sensors struggled to penetrate. Neither was a long-term solution, but long-term wasn't the problem anymore. The problem was the next 11 minutes. Control, I'm going to need you to clarify something for me. You are in no position to request clarifications, pilot. Humor me. These children, the non-viable ones. How old are they? Average age, ballpark figure. Silence. He could almost hear the controller deciding whether to answer, weighing the tactical value of information against the risk of humanizing the cargo. Approximately 4 to 7 standard years, adjusted for species maturation rates. Kalen closed his eyes. 4 to 7 years old. 42 of them. Abandoned by an empire because they didn't meet some genetic standard for breeding programs. He didn't know what those programs were. Didn't want to know. But he could guess. The compact was obsessed with genetic purity. He had heard rumors, whispered in spaceport bars by crews who had seen too much and said too little, about worlds where children were sorted into bloodlines like livestock, where imperfection was a death sentence, where the concept of non-viable meant something far worse than simply unwanted. Pilot Voss, you have 8 minutes remaining. He opened his eyes. Control, I'm going to make you a counteroffer. You are not empowered to make counteroffers. I'm making one anyway. You're going to let me complete the original transport contract. I'm going to deliver these children to the original destination. And you're going to pretend this conversation never happened. That is not possible. The destination facility was decommissioned 12 days ago. The program has been terminated. There is nowhere to deliver them. The words hit him like a physical blow. Decommissioned. Terminated. Not just the children, the entire program. Whatever world these kids had been taken from, whatever purpose they had been bred or selected for, it was over. They were orphaned twice over. First by conquest, then by bureaucratic obsolescence. Then where were they supposed to go? His voice cracked. He didn't care. That information remains classified. Pilot, your emotional response is noted but irrelevant. You are a contractor. You are not responsible for the cargo's ultimate disposition. You are responsible only for following the instructions in your contract. Those instructions now include a termination clause activated by the program's dissolution. Decouple the module. Do it cleanly. Do it now, and we will ensure you are compensated for the full contract amount plus a bonus for cooperation. Refuse, and you will be marked as a rogue asset. You understand what that means. Rogue asset. Corporate speak for shoot on sight. He understood perfectly. But he also understood something the controller apparently did not. Something that had been bred into humans over 1 million years of evolution, written into their DNA long before they ever left Earth. Long before they became a minor species in a galaxy dominated by older, colder empires. Humans did not abandon children. It wasn't rational. It wasn't tactical. It wasn't even always moral. History was full of human beings who had done terrible things to children. But when it came down to a single moment, a single choice between walking away and staying, between obeying orders and protecting the young, something ancient and furious woke up in the human hindbrain. Something that would rather die than run. Kalen felt that something waking up now. It felt like fire spreading through his veins. Control, I'm going to give you one chance to rescind this order. You are not in a position to give chances. I'm giving one anyway. Rescind the order. Tell me this was a mistake. Tell me there's been some kind of communication error. Tell me you're sending new coordinates for delivery instead of disposal. Do that right now, and I will forget this conversation ever happened. I will complete the contract, I will collect my pay, I will go home and never think about any of this again. That is not possible. Then I am not decoupling the cargo module. I am not turning around. I am not proceeding to denull. I am going to fly this ship somewhere else, and I am going to find a way to protect these children, and you are going to have to come and stop me. The controller's voice changed. The coldness remained, but something else crept in beneath it. Something that sounded almost like curiosity. And where do you intend to go, Pilot Voss? There is nowhere in compact space that will shelter you. There is no port that will risk war by harboring a rogue asset. There is no species in this sector that will defy the compact for the sake of 42 non-viable children from a world you cannot even name. I don't know yet. That is not a plan. No, Kalen admitted. It's not. But it's better than the alternative. He reached forward and cut the comm link. The sudden silence in the cockpit was deafening. No more cold voices. No more threats. Just the hum of the life support, the whisper of the engines, and the distant, rhythmic beeping of the cryopod monitors in the cargo bay behind him. 42 heartbeats slowed by chemical sleep. 42 reasons to keep moving. He rerouted power to the main thrusters, calculated a new trajectory, and felt the ship lurch as it changed course away from denull and toward the frozen gas giant on the edge of the system. It was a temporary solution at best, a few hours of hiding in the radiation shadow while he figured out his next move. But temporary was better than nothing. Temporary meant he was still fighting. The compact would not let this stand. He knew that. They had cruisers, fighters, tracking networks spanning entire star systems. He had a 30-year-old freighter with mismatched hull plates and a second-hand nav computer that occasionally tried to kill him by flying into stars. The odds were not just against him. They were astronomical, but the children didn't know that. They were sleeping peacefully in their pods, dreaming whatever dreams 4 to 7-year-old aliens dreamed, completely unaware that their lives were being debated by a cargo pilot and a cold-voiced bureaucrat 3 light hours away. They didn't know they had been declared non-viable. They didn't know they were supposed to be disposed of. They only knew, if they knew anything at all, that they had been taken from somewhere, loaded onto a ship and put to sleep by gentle hands. Gentle hands. Kalen looked down at his own hands on the controls. They were shaking. Not from fear, from rage. He had been a cargo pilot for 18 years. He had shipped everything from medical supplies to mining equipment to live animals destined for off-world zoos. He had never once thought of his cargo as anything other than cargo, boxes to be moved from point A to point B, units to be delivered for payment. It was a simple transaction, clean, emotionally safe. But somewhere along the way, between loading the cryopods on that conquered world and watching their tiny faces disappear into the chemical fog, something had broken inside that emotional safety. He had started thinking of them as children instead of cargo. He had started wondering what their names were, whether they had parents somewhere, whether anyone was looking for them. He had started making up stories about them in his head, the smallest one with the unusual ear pattern, the one who had been crying before the sedation took hold, the 2 who were holding hands even in sleep. He had broken his own most important rule. Don't name the cargo. Don't imagine its life. Don't turn it into something you'll miss when it's gone. Too late now. The proximity alarm blared, yanking him back to the present. A ship had just dropped out of FTL at the edge of the system. Compact signature. Military configuration. Not the cruiser from D-Null. Something smaller, faster, meaner. A corvette, maybe, or a system patrol boat. Whatever it was accelerating hard on an intercept course. They hadn't even waited the full 11 minutes. Kalen's hands stopped shaking. The rage was still there, but it had crystallized into something harder. something cold, something that calculated angles and velocities and fuel reserves with merciless precision. The gas giant was still 4 hours away. The corvette would intercept him in under 2. He had no weapons, no shields worth mentioning, no escape pod that could carry 42 cryopods. He had only one advantage, and it was a strange one. He had nothing to lose. People with nothing to lose made terrible enemies. The Compact, with its cruisers and its protocols and its cold-voiced bureaucrats, did not understand this. They thought in terms of assets and liabilities, costs and benefits, rational self-interest. They could not compute a human being who would throw away his career, his freedom and his life for 42 pieces of cargo that had already been written off as non-viable. They were about to learn. Kalen opened a channel to the approaching corvette, not because he wanted to talk, because he wanted them to hear what was in his voice. This is Transport Shepherd 9 to incoming compact vessel. I am carrying 42 children in cryostasis. I have been ordered to abandon them for disposal. I have refused that order. I am now proceeding to an unknown destination with unknown intentions. If you fire on this ship, you will kill 42 children along with me. If you board this ship, you will have to go through me to get to them. I don't know how this ends, but I know how it starts. It starts with you making a choice. Are you the kind of person who kills children? Because that's what this is now. Not a disposal, not a termination, a killing of children. And you will have to live with that for the rest of your life. He cut the channel before they could respond. The corvette's acceleration curve changed, slowed, not stopped. They were still coming, but the angle of approach shifted, became more cautious, more observational. They were assessing, calculating, trying to understand what they were dealing with. Good. Let them calculate. Let them assess. Every second they spent thinking was a second he spent flying. The gas giant loomed ahead, a hazy blue-white disk with rings that glittered like shattered glass. Its radiation shadow was deep and wide, a perfect hiding place for a small ship with nowhere else to go. But hiding wasn't enough. He needed a destination. A plan. A way to turn 42 non-viable children into 42 reasons for someone, somewhere, to defy the Compact. And then, as the corvette's sensor pings began painting his hull, he remembered something, a story, told in a spaceport bar by an old trader with a cybernetic eye and a bottle of something that glowed in the dark, about a sector on the far side of compact space, beyond the reach of their laws and their cruisers and their genetic purity programs. A sector where outcasts went to disappear, where the only currency was desperation and the only law was mutual survival. A place called the Verge. The trader had described it as a mistake, a region of space that had never been properly claimed because no one wanted it. Too many radiation hazards, too many unstable stars, too many worlds that were barely habitable by any known species. The Compact had surveyed it once, declared it worthless, and never returned. But worthless was relative. Worthless to an empire meant priceless to someone with nowhere else to go. Kalen pulled up the star charts. The Verge was 17 days away at maximum sublight. He didn't have 17 days of fuel. He didn't have 17 days of supplies. He didn't have 17 days before the Compact brought in bigger ships with faster engines and more determined captains. But he had something else, something the Compact hadn't accounted for. He had 42 children who needed him to be smarter, faster, and more desperate than anyone had ever been before. He changed course again, aiming not for the gas giant's radiation shadow but for one of its moons, a tiny ice ball with no atmosphere and no strategic value. The corvette would follow, because that was what corvettes did. They followed. They pursued. They assumed their prey was running blindly. They were wrong. Kalen had no weapons, but he had a 30-year-old freighter with mismatched hull plates and a second-hand nav computer that occasionally tried to kill him. And one thing he had learned in 18 years of flying through dangerous space was that old ships had secrets. They had been patched and modified and jury-rigged so many times that even their owners didn't know everything they could do. His ship, the Shepherd 9, had a secret. An experimental drive core, installed by a previous owner who had been trying to build a faster-than-light engine without a license. The core was unstable, prone to overheating, and technically illegal in 17 systems. But it could do something no standard drive could do. It could make a short-range FTL jump inside a gravity well. Everyone knew that was impossible. Gravity wells tore FTL drives apart. That was basic physics. But the previous owner had been a physicist who didn't believe in basic physics, and he had built a drive that bent the rules just enough to work for a few seconds at a time. Short jumps. Dangerous jumps. Jumps that would probably kill you if you did them too often. But Kalen didn't need too often. He needed once. The moon was ahead now, close enough to see its cratered surface. The Corvette was closer, close enough to see its running lights. They were hailing him again, probably with new threats or new offers or new ways to say the same old thing. He ignored them. His hands moved across the controls, activating systems that hadn't been touched in years. The experimental core hummed to life, vibrating through the deck plates in a way that felt wrong, like the ship was groaning in protest. "I know," he muttered. "I know." Just a few more minutes. Behind him, the cryopod monitors beeped steadily. 42 heartbeats, 42 reasons to push the core past its limits. The Corvette opened fire. Not to destroy. The targeting was too careful for that. Warning shots. Plasma bolts that streaked past his hull close enough to make the temperature alarm scream. They wanted him to stop. They wanted him to surrender. They wanted him to be rational. Kalen pulled the jump lever. The universe turned inside out. For a subjective eternity that lasted less than a second, he was everywhere and nowhere, stretched across dimensions that had no names, screaming without a mouth, dying without a body. The experimental core screamed too, its containment fields buckling under forces they were never designed to handle. Alarms blared. Smoke filled the cockpit. Something heavy fell off the hull with a sound like a dying animal. And then it was over. He was somewhere else. The moon was gone. The Corvette was gone. The star field outside his viewport was completely different. Denser, brighter, crowded with the light of 1,000 suns pressed too close together. The Verge. He had made it. 17 days of travel compressed into a single impossible second. The core was slag, useless, melted, never to function again. The ship was damaged in a dozen ways he hadn't even begun to catalog. His head was bleeding from a gash above his eye, and his left arm wasn't moving the way it was supposed to. But the cryopod monitors were still beeping. 42 heartbeats still there, still alive. Kalen laughed. It was a broken sound, half hysterical, half triumphant. He had just committed an act of war against the Verexian Compact. He had just used illegal technology to make an impossible jump. He had just become the most wanted human in this sector of the galaxy. And he had no idea what came next. The Verge was supposed to be a place for outcasts, but outcasts didn't usually arrive in a crippled freighter with 42 children in cryostasis and a compact Corvette, probably already reporting his jump vector to every ship in the region. He needed help. He needed allies. He needed a miracle. Instead, he got a hailing signal. Not compact. The frequency was wrong. The encryption was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. But it was directed at him, specific and insistent, as if whoever was sending it had been expecting him. He opened the channel. A face appeared on his display. Not human. Not compact. Something else entirely. Leathery skin, too many eyes, a mouth that seemed to be in the wrong place relative to everything else. The being stared at him for a long moment, its eyes blinking in sequence before it spoke in a language his translator struggled to parse. "You are the human. The one who refused." Kalen stared back. "I refuse a lot of things. You'll have to be more specific." "The children. 42 non-viables. You refused the disposal order. You ran. You jumped inside a gravity well, which should be impossible, but you did it anyway because you would rather die than abandon them." The being tilted its head, all its eyes focusing on him at once. "We have been watching. We have been waiting. There are others like you, outcasts, refugees, rebels. We have been building something here, in the spaces the empires do not want. But we have been missing one thing. What's that? A symbol. A story. Something that cannot be argued with or negotiated away. Something that proves that defiance is possible. The being gestured with a limb that might have been an arm. You just jumped a freighter across 17 days of space in 1 second because you refused to let children die. Do you understand what that looks like to the outcasts of the Verge? Do you understand what that means? Kalen understood nothing. His head was pounding. His arm was probably broken. His ship was falling apart around him. But he understood one thing with absolute clarity. He was not alone anymore. I need help, he said. The children are in cryopods. I don't know how long they've been under. I don't know if they're healthy. I don't know anything about their species or their needs or even their names. I just know they're alive, and I need to keep them that way. The being's mouth moved in what might have been a smile. Then you have come to the right place. The Verge is full of things that should not be alive. Refugees from worlds that no longer exist. Species that were declared non-viable. Children who were never supposed to grow up. It extended a limb toward the display as if reaching through the screen. Bring them. We will help. But understand this, human. Once you bring them here, you become part of something larger than yourself. You become a target. The Compact will not forget. They will come. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. And when they do, you will have to decide whether to run again or stand. Kalen looked at the cryopod monitors. 42 heartbeats. Steady. Strong. He thought about the cold voice of the controller, the casual cruelty of the disposal order, the way the Compact had reduced children to non-viable biological assets. He thought about his nephew, dead at 5 years old, no one's fault, just the cruel randomness of biology. He thought about how he would have moved stars to save that boy if he could have. He thought about how he had never gotten the chance. Now he had a chance. Not for his nephew, for 42 children he had never met from a species he didn't know, on a world whose name he might never learn. I'm not running anymore, he said. I'm done running. The being's eyes blinked in sequence again, faster this time. Approval, maybe, or anticipation. Good. Then let us show you what the outcasts have built. Let us show you what happens when the non-viable refuse to disappear. The channel closed. Ahead of him, lights flickered on in the darkness. Not a station, not a colony, but a flotilla. Hundreds of ships, maybe thousands, of every size and configuration imaginable, linked together by walkways and docking tubes and the sheer stubborn refusal to die. Ships that had been declared worthless by empires that valued only perfection. Ships that had found each other in the spaces no one else wanted. Kalen guided his crippled freighter toward the nearest docking port. The engines were failing, the hull was leaking atmosphere, and the experimental core was a smoking ruin behind him. But he had 42 heartbeats in his cargo bay, and that was enough. It would have to be enough. The docking clamps engaged with a sound like a sigh of relief. The moment the ship was secure, the cargo bay doors opened from the outside, not by his command, but by the hands of the outcasts who had been waiting. He saw them swarm into the bay, dozens of beings from a dozen species, all moving with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this before. They had done this before. Of course they had. The Verge was built by people who said no, people who refused disposal orders, people who looked at children declared non-viable and saw something worth protecting. Kalen climbed out of the cockpit, his broken arm hanging useless at his side, his bleeding head leaving a trail of red on the deck plates. He made it to the cargo bay, just as the first cryopod was being disconnected from the ship's power supply and transferred to a portable generator carried by two beings he couldn't even name. Careful, he said. They're small, fragile. They've been under for 11 days. The being with too many eyes appeared at his side. Up close it was even stranger. Leathery skin that seemed to shift colors in the light, a smell like ozone and cinnamon, a presence that felt older than any species he had ever encountered. We know, it said. We have cared for many like them. Non-viables from a dozen breeding programs. Children who were supposed to be terminated. They grow up here. They learn to fight here. They become something the empires never expected. What's that? The being turned all its eyes toward him, and for a moment Kalen felt like he was being measured, weighed, found worthy. Family. The word hit him harder than he expected. He had spent 18 years alone in the black, moving cargo from one port to another, never staying long enough to form connections, never letting himself care about anything that couldn't be loaded into a cargo bay. Family was a word from another life, a life that had ended when his nephew died and his sister stopped returning his calls and the shipping lanes became the only home he needed. But here, in this cargo bay surrounded by outcasts and refugees and children who had been declared worthless, the word meant something different. It meant choosing each other. It meant refusing to let anyone be disposed of. It meant 42 heartbeats in cryopods and a broken pilot who had finally stopped running. "How long do I have?" he asked. "Before they come." The being's eyes blinked slowly, thoughtfully. The compact does not move quickly. They will investigate, they will deliberate, they will consult their protocols and their hierarchies and their genetic purity charts. They will spend weeks deciding what to do about one human who said no. It paused. But they will come. Eventually. And when they do, they will not send a corvette. They will send a fleet. Kalen nodded. He had expected that. He had made peace with that somewhere between the corvette's warning shots and the impossible jump that should have killed him. "Then we'll need to be ready. We already are." The being gestured toward the flotilla visible through the cargo bay's viewing port. "These ships are not just homes. They are weapons. Every outcast here has a reason to hate the compact. Every refugee has lost something to their breeding programs and their purity laws. They have been waiting for someone to follow. Someone who would not run. I ran. I literally just ran. I jumped across 17 days of space to get away from them. You ran toward something that is different." The being's mouth curved again. "You ran toward children who needed you. You ran toward the only place in the galaxy that would take them. You did not run away. You ran home." Home. Kalen looked around the cargo bay, at the outcasts carefully disconnecting cryopods, at the children still sleeping peacefully inside, at the broken ship that had carried them all here against impossible odds. He thought about the cold voice of the controller, the disposal order that had started everything, the moment he had said no and meant it with every cell in his body. He thought about 42 heartbeats. He thought about family. "Okay," he said. "Show me what comes next." The being with too many eyes extended a limb. Kalen took it with his good hand. The grip was warm, firm, alive in a way that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with the simple, stubborn act of refusing to let go. Outside, in the darkness of the Verge, the lights of the outcast flotilla burned brighter than any empire. And somewhere far away, the compact was already planning their response. Already calculating the cost of one human's defiance. Already asking themselves the question that would haunt them for years to come. How many more would say no? How many more would refuse to abandon the children? How many more would choose 42 heartbeats over an empire's cold arithmetic? The answer, Kalen knew, was not zero. It had never been zero. It was just waiting to be found. In the hearts of cargo pilots and outcasts and refugees. In the spaces between stars where empires feared to tread. In the quiet defiance of people who had been declared non-viable and refused to disappear. He was not the first. He would not be the last. But he was here now, and 42 children were safe now. And when the compact finally came, when they brought their fleets and their protocols and their cold certainty, they would find something they did not expect. They would find a family that would not break. They would find a human who had learned to stand. They would find 42 reasons to never stop fighting. The cargo bay doors closed behind him. The outcasts carried the cryopods into the flotilla, toward warmth and safety, and a future no one had ever promised them. Kalen walked with them, his broken arm forgotten, his bleeding head ignored, his heart beating in time with 42 others. The story was not over. It was just beginning. But for now, in this moment, in this place, the children were safe. The human had refused, and the empire, vast and powerful and certain of its own righteousness, had learned something it could never unlearn. Some things cannot be disposed of. Some things are never non-viable. Some things are worth burning an empire for. Kalen Voss smiled. It hurt. Everything hurt, but the smile was real as the 42 heartbeats echoing through the flotilla's corridors, as real as the family he had found in the unlikeliest place in the galaxy. He was home, and he would never run again.